Good day and thanks for watching. The winter outlook is always a big interest each year for many businesses so they can begin planning for the upcoming winter. We want to help snow and ice management contractors, ski resorts, and other snow-dependent businesses get an idea on what we expect this winter. We're going to dive behind the scenes and look at some of the long-range meteorology involved in crafting an outlook months in advance. We monitor several patterns, some of which hold clues into what conditions have the best chance of developing. Oceanic and atmospheric patterns, pressure and temperature differences in specific locations give us insight on what may transpire in the coming months. Now here's Mark Spencer discussing the overall pattern setup and what we saw last year.
Let's start off by taking a look at what we saw for last winter here. Our winter forecast for last winter wasn't too bad. We did pretty good talking about the cold up here in the northern plains, and that is where we saw the coldest air in the United States, slightly cooler temperatures across the west. It was a little wetter out there too, but look what the warm air across the southeast. They definitely had some warm days last winter. We picked up on some warmer air here, but it definitely got a lot warmer than we thought, and it got a lot further north, all the way up into the Great Lakes region, where we did see some warmer than normal temperatures for a good part of the winter. Now, some of these areas, yeah, you had some very cold days, but we didn't have a lot of them. So this is what we saw for last winter. I do think we're going to see something different this winter for sure, and we'll get into some of those pattern drivers coming up here. Next, let's take a look at the equatorial Pacific Ocean. So we have Australia here, we have the Indonesian islands here, and then over here you have the United States. And right here is the equator. And we look at the sea surface temperatures in this region when we are thinking El Nino and La Nina. El Nino being warmer than usual temperatures, La Nina being cooler than usual temperatures. Plenty of warmer water. We do see some cooler water into the eastern equatorial Pacific coming up towards the coast of South America there. And I do think we're going to see some of this continue to warm over the next couple of months. And so I think we'll have slightly above average sea surface temperatures in this area, and that may be just enough to get us into a very weak El Nino situation. Now, what do the models say about this? Well, looking at the American CFS model, we see here in the past, we've been just pretty much neutral, anywhere between 0.5 and negative 0.5 here is generally considered neutral, with of course 0 being neutral. And we've been kind of floating with that upper end of it. We've dropped down here in early September, and now we're kind of back up towards a neutral to even very weak El Nino. Now look at the model trends. That's all these different lines, all the different members of the models. Most of them say we're going to stay pretty much on the neutral track. A couple of them want to dip us into a very, very weak La Nina for just a brief moment there towards the end of winter, but it looks like we're going to stay in this fairly neutral pattern for much of the winter. Now what does that mean? That means pretty much anything goes. We'll have some warm days, we'll have some cold days, we'll have some big snowstorms, and we'll have a bunch of little clippers move through the region. Brian's going to break it all down for you as he goes over a lot of these drivers.
Definitely leading to some pattern uncertainty as we go forward, but what we are a little bit more confident on is this big area of ridging across portions of the Northwest and into the Gulf of Alaska. That's known as a negative EPO, or Eastern Pacific Oscillation. It typically provides warm temperatures across the west, and then across the east, that's where you get your big cold, because that's where the trough develops as the jet stream dips down towards the south and allows for that Arctic high to settle in at times. So that'll be one of the big things that we're watching out for across portions of the country. Now with that, notice the southeastern ridge of high pressure, that warm weather across portions of Florida, back up into Georgia and the Carolinas. Now if this moves further off towards the east, that's going to throw a wrench in the machine. That's going to be a wild card for this winter, where we could see more sustained warmer temperatures further north. But if we have that high pressure area coming down here and that area of troughing aloft that'll allow for cold weather, that'll provide some cold weather. I think it's going to be something where it's going to take a little bit of time to really anchor into any cold winter pattern. We're likely going to stay warm the rest of fall, into the early portions of winter, and then flip things once we get into January and February and possibly get very, very cold at times, and then that warmth will anchor in out across portions of the west. How are we doing with our refrigerator or freezer of the atmosphere, our snowpack well off towards the North Pole and Eurasia? Well, last year it wasn't too bad across even Canada and then up towards the North Pole. This year, not so much, not much in the way of snow cover yet on the same date. So it's something we're going to have to monitor. We still got time, another month really or so, to really get that established. So we'll keep an eye on that going forward. But models do indicate over the next couple weeks getting that going. What are some of the models showcasing for this winter? Whoa, that is a blowtorch, well above average temperatures. This is the American CFS model, our long-range climate model that projects months out. This has a tendency, a warm bias, and that's been pretty consistent in several years where it's shown a lot of warm weather, and that's not always happened. So we can't really take this model too seriously. It's not done too well recently. One of the models that does a typically much better job is the European model. Now that is showing something a little different in the way of cooler weather out towards the west and warmer weather out towards the east, but nothing as significant in terms of warmth as what the CFS has. So something to keep in mind, but the European hasn't even been one of the best models in the long range over the course of the last few years or so. The Canadian has been better, and these are the upper level heights, the general tendencies towards ridging or troughing in the atmosphere. This would be your ridging, so high pressure area, and this would be the tendency for more troughing, so more colder air tendencies. So this is what we're most closely leaning on as we go towards our winter forecast. One more model that I'm going to showcase for you is the Jamstack, or the Japanese model, and this one has also done a pretty decent job over the last few years or so. Notice, very warm across much of the globe, but some of the biggest areas, probably the biggest areas of cold, right across the United States, especially across the middle of the country, and then further east as well. So a little bit more of the weight kind of thrown towards the Japanese and the Canadian model as well. So what's our actual forecast looking like?
All right, as we take all of this and put it together and we look back at history and what we call analog years, years with similar temperature and moisture patterns amongst other things, we get something that's going to look like this. So let's take a look at temperatures first. Let's start across the west coast, and in the somewhat neutral pattern that we are thinking it's going to develop, we're looking at drier conditions across much of the west coast. So we could see some relief from mudslides that we saw last year, but we could be talking about some wildfires in spots too. And then across the southeastern United States, again, not too uncommon, a little bit warmer than average there. Much of the central and southern plains, and even into much of the southeast, is looking at near average temperatures for the most part. As we get up and towards parts of the middle Mississippi Valley, the lower Ohio Valley, parts of the Tennessee Valley, and then on up into the eastern Great Lakes, we're looking at slightly below average temperatures. The bulk of the cold air, we believe, will be focused right around the Great Lakes, Minneapolis, Chicago, Detroit to Cleveland. That's where we think the bulk of the cold air will be. This may shift east and west a little bit at times depending on the specific setup going through the winter, but much of it will be here. Much of the East Coast, you're going to be near average, and here is why. Let's take a look at precipitation that we expect for the winter. Again, drier, warmer and drier across much of the western United States. A good portion of the country near average overall on precipitation, even into much of the Great Lakes. Where's the bulk of the precipitation going to be? Right along the big storm track with these synoptic systems from Oklahoma up into the Tennessee Valley, much of the lower Ohio Valley, and then on up into the mid-Atlantic and northeastern United States. That's why here we're not going to see such cold air, because we have a lot of precipitation that's going to be moving through there. Will it be rain or will it be snow? Too hard to tell yet. That's going to depend on when things set up. But if you're a fan of I-95 runners, of those storms up the East Coast, you're going to see a few of them, I think, and a couple of them could be decent, especially as we head into the second half of winter. So what are we looking at for snowfall? Well, as you would guess, where the cold air is, that's where we're going to see the most snow. We're going to see a lot of it across parts of the, well, much of the Great Lakes, down into parts of the Tennessee Valley, the Mid-Atlantic, and then on up into the northeastern United States. Again, that includes the I-94 corridor there between Boston and D.C., where we'll see, again, a couple systems that I think could be fairly active this winter. Much of the United States near average to even slightly below average, and of course out in the mountains here in the Rockies, we're going to see above average snowfall there as well. So plenty of snow to go around if you're on the East Coast. If you're on the West Coast, warm and dry this year, and outside of that, near average conditions expected for this winter. It will take time for the pattern to establish itself, so the current warm stretch may last most of the fall and into early winter. We believe January into February is where the Midwest and East Coast will see the coldest air of the season.
We'll need to monitor how the other teleconnections like the NAO and the PNA develop. At this point, with a negative EPO, neutral ENSO, and likely negative QBO, that's a pretty good correlation for cold air along the East Coast.
And if you're ready to save time and money, contact us today and mention this winter forecast to get 20% off your first month of service with NeoWeather. You'll have peace of mind getting accurate impact-based forecast for your location and 24/7 telephone and email support all winter long.
Our service is definitely a game changer for snow contractors. Thanks for watching.